Okay, so we left off at the Chavav Amud Aleph, about 8 lines from the top. So there was a case where Mesiach Lefi Tumo. Oh, so last or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about testimony that someone was a Levi. Or last week, you saw Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi made someone a Kohen based on what the father said, and Rabbi made someone into a Levi. So what does it matter to be a Levi? That was one thing. So I thought of a real nafkamina. If someone was a Levi, then if he would have a baby, his son wouldn't need a pigeon a ben. So that's not exactly a status of having to do something because you're a Levi, but by being a Levi, he wouldn't have to do pigeon a ben.
But going back, the Levium were, righteous back in.
Right, it's not about righteous or not righteous, but I'm just saying, what does it matter if someone's a Levi? It's not like he gets to eat something that other people don't get to eat, or even Meiser Rishon, even without the fact that Ezra and Nehemiah sanctioned the Levium for refusing to come, that the Kohanim get the Meiser right away. But what does it matter if someone's a Levi nowadays? So one possible thing is that they would not have to do Pidyon Aben. So I mean, that's not something they would have to do. Normally, we're talking about something that but here's something they wouldn't have to do with the Levi. So the Gemara at the very top here on Chav Vav Amud Aleph 26a was saying that Mesiach Lefi Tumo is when you're talking. So I gave the example that when, according to the Ramah, doesn't pass away, but for Svardim, the Mechaber says that if a small amount of milk fell into chicken soup, and you're not sure if there's a taste of milk, so Ashkenazim don't rely on asking a chef for a taste, but we say if there's 60 times the soup, then there is the amount of milk that fell in, there's no taste, so it's okay. So according to the Mechaber, let's say there's only 50 times the soup, but you have an expert chef taste it, and he doesn't taste any milk, you could add that chicken soup also as fleishiks. It's not a problem, because we rely on timas kfela, the chef tasting. So how come, even if obviously it's a non-Jewish chef, because if it's a Jewish chef and he would taste it and he tasted milk in it, then he just ate basar b'challah. So that wouldn't be so great. So how come we believe the non-Jew? Normally we wouldn't believe a non-Jew. So the answer is because he's a chef, he has a big reputation. If he would tell us something that wasn't true, it would ruin his reputation. So, or it's someone who's an expert who can distinguish the taste, but if he doesn't know that anything is riding on what he's saying, he has no reason to lie, so he's telling the truth because he has nothing in it to. So the ArtScroll translates as Mesiach Lefi Tumo, which you're talking through innocence, meaning you don't know that anything special is dependent on what you say. ArtScroll calls it talking casually, and ArtScroll says literally talking in one's innocence. It denotes words that are uttered in a casual manner without awareness of their legal ramifications. Since such speech is not intended to bring benefit or loss to anyone, it is sometimes deemed more valuable than formal testimony. And so I told Jeff that I think after 2 weeks ago, what's an example of something that wasn't in Mesiach Lefi Tumo. So once there was for a bar mitzvah, and the parents were divorced, and so the mother says her father was a Levi. So when we were taking the names to the Mishberach, she says, her father's a Levi. So then the father says, I'm also a Levi. In that case, I didn't believe him at all, because from the context of that, it was she said this, and there was some animosity between them. So I didn't believe that that what the father was saying was true, because that was a case where there was no reason to believe that it was true. It ended up later it was true, because people from the Shul Davendat said that he was always like, oh, no, I remember the other thing. I couldn't remember the other thing. Now I remember the other thing. Then there was a different case. Someone, my father was talking to a family because someone passed away, and the son says my father was a Levi, and the daughter says no, he wasn't a Levi. But he was a Levi at the shul. He always got the second aliyah. So she said, remember when we moved here, there were no Levis, so the shul made our father into a Levi, so they'd have a Levi. They come up, but it wasn't really a Levi. They did it at the shul, which wasn't right. Who wants to be a Levi? That I think was a line from Mr. Rathner, Al Shalom. I think I think that Mr. Rathner, Nathan Rathner, Ricky's father, used to auction the aliyahs at Rabbi Ryan's shul. So I think some of the phrases my father does from the auction, I don't want to be accused of railroading, and who wants to be I think he got those from Mr. Rathner, Al Shalom. So the second story of someone being a Levi, I'm not sure if this was what I was thinking or not, but there was a case where the brother says, Dad was a Levi, and the sister said, no, he wasn't. The Levi didn't have any shul, so they said, you'll be the Levi. And then the other thing I realized is that, what's the halachic ramification of being a Levi? They don't get Meiser, or even Yisrael could eat Meiser. So a Levi, let's say, wouldn't have to give, if the mother was a Levi or the father was a Levi and they had a baby, they wouldn't have to do Pidyon Haben if the first boy was so that's halachic. So then this situation that the Gemara said here was, there was a case, he was speaking Mesech Lefi Tumo. He was just saying, oh, I remember when, so he wasn't telling it to say anything. He was just, oh, I remember this happened. So because it wasn't in a formal testimony setting, it gave it more credibility. And he said, I remember my father took me out of school and he took me to the mikvah. He put me on his shoulders. He took me to the mikvah. So the reason he took me on the shoulders, so he wouldn't find any shrutzim, any certain types of rats on the side of the road and play with them and become tamei from them. And once it got dark, he gave me truma, and my kid when I get back to school, the friends called me Yochanan who eats chalas. So they said, so that's pretty good indication that even though he was saying this from his youth, he remembered this. And this is, years later, and he's talking about what happened when he was 10 years old or less, before he was bar mitzvah. So we believe what he said. I think the Rambam says this case that was only for not making him a real Kohen, only a Kohen to eat truma midrabanan, which we saw last week, that some of these things we're not making them into a real Kohen, but we'd let them eat truma midrabanan, which according to Rashi would, let's say, be of truma vegetables, which isn't real truma, or according to Rashi's own opinion, let's say an orange tree, according to Rashi, truma isn't midiraisa, whereas according to the Rambam it would be. So he would be allowed to eat, according to Rashi, the truma oranges, which isn't really truma midiraisa, because there's no truma midiraisa on oranges. Or it could be truma from Bavel or from Syria, according to the opinion that the kibush, the conquest of Syria, was a private kibush, so it didn't have real kedushas Eretz Yisrael. So truma midrabanan, either because the land that the truma is from, and that could even be wheat and olives, because that land isn't real Eretz Yisrael, or it could be real Eretz Yisrael, but on produce that the Torah doesn't require you to take truma off of. Two different types of truma midrabanan.
Topic for another time.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about, should we go to a Jewish doctor or a non-Jewish doctor? I've thought about that for years, and it's a topic for another time. But
I mean, halachically,
I would say,
but yeah, that's basically the right answer. I mean,
well,
from a halachic perspective, in regard to businesses, you're supposed to. We saw this in Parshas Bahar. When you buy merchandise from your fellow Jew, so you should buy from a Jewish person versus a not Jewish person. So if we assume that let's say in the economy, GDP is the sum of all goods and services. So seeing a doctor is a service, right? If I go and buy, it's not a good, it's a service.
When you go to a doctor,
right? But I'm saying if it's a service, so and if halacha would recognize buying a service the same as it, which I'm not sure that that's true, from that perspective, maybe you should go to a Jewish doctor. But also, according to the way Rishonim understand the permission, that because the Gemara in Bava Kama says that the Torah gave permission for doctors to heal, because it says, "V'yirape, yirape." In Parshas Mishpatim, I think you should surely heal. So there's machlokas between different Rishonim. What do doctors have a right to heal? According to some Rishonim, doctors don't have a right to heal internal things, because they don't know what it is and they might be causing more harm. So from that perspective, nowadays things are different, because we have diagnostic tools that we could see what's going on inside, even though we don't visibly see. there could have been more liability for a non-Jew practicing medicine because the Torah didn't necessarily allow the non-Jew to heal versus the Jew. So it might have been better to use a Jewish doctor for certain things, because if something would go wrong, the non-Jewish doctor might be liable under the Ben Noach code of manslaughter, where in a case where a Jewish doctor may not have, if they were doing the same thing, just because Rabbi Bleich probably discusses it in a couple places over there, probably in that 2-volume bioethical dilemmas, probably when he's talking about being a doctor. So I don't know if he talks about that about a not Jewish doctor. I know that definitely discusses about what the Torah allows to heal and what not to heal. But for the main thing, if you need your health, you go to the best person, right? But theoretically, there might be a reason why a non-Jewish doctor, in certain cases, or for things that are clear for abortion, a non-Jewish doctor would be guilty for manslaughter under the Ben Noach code in almost all cases, whereas Jewish doctors in certain situations wouldn't be. That Rambam is explicit about that. But also the fact is, right, so according to the opinions that they would only be able to do things that they could see, but not things that are inside. I think there's an Eben Ezra about that. But nowadays that we have, MRIs and sonographs and X-rays, does that apply at all? And now, does that part apply nowadays? Probably not. But it is something that would have applied before these technologies existed. Okay, so we're about 8 lines from the top. The last word on the line is Tanya. On 26A1, it's the last paragraph on the left side, the first column. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Shem Truma Chazaka L'Kahuna, Kach Ma'aser Rishon Chazaka L'Kahuna. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, just like someone eating Truma is a Chazaka that they're a Kohen, so eating Ma'aser Rishon is also a Chazaka that they're a Kohen. B'acholik b'veisin eino Chazaka. But if based and distributes Truma, that is not a Chazaka that you're a Kohen. The Gemara is going to explain in a few lines what the case is. Ma'aser Rishon delevihu. So the question is, how could eating Ma'aser Rishon show you're a Kohen? Ma'aser Rishon goes to a Levi, as opposed to Ma'aser Sheni, the second Ma'aser. So Ma'aser Rishon is every year, and the Ma'aser Sheni is only in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, and you bring those produce to Yerushalayim, or you redeem it, and then buy with the money, with the coins, the sanctity goes to the coins, and that is transferred to the coins, and then with the coins you have to buy human food for humans, meaning not food for your animals, and you eat that in Yerushalayim. So he answers, Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. He holds like Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. The Tana, because we learned in a brisa, and this brisa is in Bava Basra and Yevamos and Chulin. Truma lekoin Ma'aser Rishon lelevi. Divi Rabbi Akiva. Truma goes to a Kohen. The first tithe goes to a Levi. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Omer Ma'aser Rishon af lekohen. Ma'aser Rishon also goes to a Kohen. But aim or Amar Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah af lekohen, the Kohen velo Levi mi Amar. But how could you prove from there that he holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that eating Ma'aser, that Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar holds like Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah that eating Ma'aser shows you're a Kohen? Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah only said true Ma'aser is also given to a Kohen. He doesn't say it's exclusively given to a Kohen. It's given to a Levi or a Kohen. So if a Levi could eat it, how can we say someone who eats Ma'aser is definitely a Kohen, or at least has a chazak of a Kohen? No, it could be a Levi. So after Kohen, the Kohen below Levi miyamar, did he say that it exclusively goes to a Kohen and not to a Levi? Now we're in the first wide line of Chavav Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says, yes, it only goes to a Kohen, not to a Levi. Basar de Nisu Ezra. It was after Ezra gave. So I've always translated the word knas, kinsu, is from the word knas, and a knas is a monetary fine. But maybe a better translation would be a sanction under certain situations. So Ezra punished the Levium because they refused to come up to Eretz Yisrael when he was bringing people up from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. And so he said, because of that, Levium will not get Meiser anymore. You have to give it straight to the Kohen. So after Ezra punished the Levium, so then if you see someone eating a Meiser, it would have been a Kohen. It's enough to rely on to seeing that is enough to make someone to assume that someone has a chazaka being a Kohen. Vidilma ikru v'yavule, but maybe it happened to be that they gave it to a Levi. So maybe someone eating Meiser isn't necessarily a Kohen. So Amrav Chista Hachbamayaskinan Kagon de Muchzak Lebavur Kohen. It's a case where we know that his father or grandfather had a chazaka that he's a Kohen. But this particular Kohen, there was a rumor that his mother had previously been divorced, and then his father married a divorced woman. So in that case, he's a chalal, he's not a Kohen. He's not allowed to eat truma. When I said before, his grandfather could have been a Kohen. In this case, it's specifically that the father was a Kohen. I mean, the grandfather also was a Kohen, but there was no problem with the grandfather married. But his father was a Kohen, but there's a rumor that his mother was a divorcee. And this particular Kohen was, or Safek Kohen, or possibly, there was a rumor, it's not that he's a Safek Kohen, but there was a rumor that maybe he's not a real Kohen. When everyone was distributing at the granaries, the Trumas and Meisers, they gave it to him. So Levi, the lab of Levi, there's no way this guy's a Levi, because his name isn't Levi, his name is Cohen, or his name is Katz, and we knew his father was a Cohen. He's definitely not a Levi. My Igala Meimar. So what can we say? Ben Grusha ben Chalutzahu. So maybe there's a rumor that his mother was divorced. So Ben Chalutza technically, so maybe his mother had been married to someone else who died without children. So she was a widow. But because on a Torah level, she had to do Yibum or Chalitza, and her first husband's brother didn't do Yibum and did Chalitza. So midrabanan, on a rabbinic level, she is not considered an almana anymore. She's considered on a rabbinic level, a woman to whom the chalitza ceremony was performed is like a grusha and is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Even though midiraisa, it seems she is allowed to marry a Kohen, but the Rabbanan said not. So there's no shaila, according to the opinion, that Meiser Rishon is forbidden to be eaten by regular Yisraelim. They would not have given Meiser Rishon to this person. Now, we don't pass like that opinion, but there is such an opinion. But according to the opinion, and we do pass like this opinion, that a non-Levi, meaning a Yisrael, is allowed to eat Meiser, Hani Mili Lemisvit Luhu. That's only that if he eats it, he could eat it. But that opinion doesn't allow you to separate the Meiser and give it to a Yisrael. So from the fact that this person received the distribution, they would never straight from the granary. They never would have distributed Meiser straight to a Levi. Straight to a Yisrael. And we know that he didn't get it because he's a Levi. We know that his name is Katz and his father was a Kohen, and there was a rumor that his mother had been divorced before. So from the fact that they're distributing it, so when they're actually distributing it from the granary, they're fairly reliable that they'll only give it to a Kohen. So we know that this particular person, there's no way he's a Levi. So the only way that they would have given it to him is because he's really a Kohen. So it must be that the rumor that his mother had been divorced before she married his father was incorrect. Okay, so then Rabbi Shimon Elazar says if Beis Din split up truma and gave truma to this person, it's not a sign that he's a Kohen. So what's the situation? If something that a Beis Din did isn't chazaka, what could possibly be chazaka? Because who's doing the things in the Beis Din? The Dayanim. And how the Dayanim act? Based on the letter of the law. So if you can't trust the Dayanim, you can't trust anyone. What's the situation here? Rav Shesha says this is what it's saying. If the Beis Din is splitting up assets of a deceased man among the different brothers, and all the brothers get truma, you can't assume that all the brothers are kohanim, because what's the case? It could be that they're only half brothers from the father, and they had different mothers. So maybe we know that Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are good kohanim. But Yehuda, who was born fourth from a second wife, maybe that wife was divorced previously. So maybe Yehuda, so we know that the father was a Kohen. We know Reuven, Shimon, and Levi for sure are Kohanim. Maybe Yehuda is only a Chalal. We don't know for sure. So Reb Sheshes explains that in that case, the reason that Beis Din is distributing it is not because they're distributing Truma, it's that they're distributing assets. And Truma has some value. The guy, the deceased person's the assets that he left, he had, maybe he owned a giant silo. So they had to split the grain 4 ways to each of the sons. So even the son that wasn't a Kohen got the truma, not because to eat it, but because it's his asset. And what's he going to do with it? Obviously, he's going to sell it to a Kohen. Now, it happens to be from other Gemaras, I guess based on supply and demand, the price for truma is much cheaper than the price of regular food because the demand is so much smaller, because only a small percentage of Jews can eat truma. But the supply is fairly large because everything needs to have truma separated from it. So I guess based on supply and demand, the market price for truma produce was a lot cheaper than, or definitely cheaper than regular produce. Shita. So now that you're saying, Reb Sheshes is saying the case is that they were splitting assets of the father. So yeah, of course, just because Beis Din gives him truma doesn't make him a Kohen. Since the other brothers who get it, they're going to be able to eat it. Maybe if Beis Din gave it to this brother, they also gave it to him to eat. Kamash Malan, Hanach Lachila, Hai Lizvune. No, Beis Din could have distributed the assets to certain brothers and they could eat it. And this one, they told him, you can't eat it. So just because you saw Beis Din giving him, boxes of food that said truma on it, stamped on the side, it said truma, 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 it doesn't mean that he was getting it as truma because he was a Kohen. He was getting it because his father was a Kohen and he is a halal. So he was getting it because it's his asset that he inherited from his father, but he's not allowed to eat it. He would have to sell it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ein Ma'alin L'Kuna Al Piyei Echad. So the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda says we don't elevate someone to a Kohen through one witness. So if we remember the Mishnah, which was on Chaf Gimel Amud Beis, I think. A lot of pages ago in here. So the Mishnah said if two people said, I'm a Kohen and this guy with me is a Kohen, excuse me, two people come, Reuben and Shimon. Reuben says, I'm a Kohen. Shimon says, I'm a Kohen. We don't believe him. But if they testify for each other, Reuben says, I'm a Kohen and my buddy here, Shimon, is also a Kohen. And Shimon says, I'm a Kohen and my buddy Reuben is also a Kohen. Then you believe them. That's the Tanakama. But Rabbi Yehuda says, we don't make someone a Kohen through one witness. Rabbi Lazar says, when is this true? When someone's complaining, meaning there's a rumor that he's not really a Kohen. But if there's no complaint, we do one witness is enough to make him a Kohen. So obviously that's adding something that the Tanakhama didn't say. Then the fourth opinion in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says in the name of Shimon Naskan, we do elevate someone to a Kohen through one witness. So what's he saying what's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel saying that the Tanakhama didn't say? One witness is enough to establish that someone's a Kohen. So the fourth opinion in the Mishnah seems to be a repeat of the first opinion. So what's the difference between the fourth opinion of Shimon Gamliel and the Tanakhama? So the Gemara says, we're finally from the bottom. No, actually, we have to turn the page, if you're on the English side, to 26a3. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the same opinion as Rabbi Eliezer. So he's actually saying it's the same as the third opinion in the Mishnah. The third opinion in the Mishnah that if there's Oren. So Rashi says because if there's rumors that he's not a Kohen, certainly one witness wouldn't be enough. So when Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says we elevate through one witness, so he must be agreeing with Rabbi Lazar. So the third and fourth opinion we're saying is the same. So and if you want to answer that the difference is what if the rumor came from only one person? The Rabbi Lazar Savar Ir Chad, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Savar Ir Trey, that Rabbi Lazar holds that one person coming and saying, I think that guy's mother was a divorced woman, so he's not really a Kohen. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says one person saying that it's completely not believed. We need two people. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Divrei Hakol ein ira pachos mishnayim. Rabbi Yochanan says, according to everyone, this error, this rumor that someone's yichus isn't what it's supposed to be necessarily. You need two Adam to establish that chink in the armor, that suspicion. So, what's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel adding to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in the Mishnah? And what's this opinion? The muchziklan bavur dahavi kohen who. We know from him that his father was a kohen. But then there's rumor, this complaint. I mean, the error is what complaint, but in this case, there's some type of doubt about his status. Came that this guy's mother was divorced or had a chalutza, so it makes him into a halal. So we already know that he's from a Kohen family. The question is, was his mother kosher to marry a Kohen or not? But achtine, and they demoted him from a Kohen until they would investigate it, because the Beis Din was very strict. Even though it's not enough to say that you're not a Kohen, the Beis Din didn't want, well, in the time of the Mishnah, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they wouldn't want him to do any avoda if he wasn't really a Kohen. It may not be puzzled. There's a, and Kedushin Daf Samach Vav, there's a, from Parshas Hazinu, I know, from Zos Bracha, Baruch Hashem Chelo, that there's actually a machlokas. If he was doing the avoda, I think it's a machlokas, and they said you're ben Grushman Chalutza, do we say that all the avodas he did before were no good, or do we say they are good? And the huge nafkamina. If someone did an avera, let's say by accident, they wrote on Shabbos, and so they had to bring a korban chatas. If it ends up that he wasn't a Kohen, his korban was never brought properly. He would need to bring the korban again, even if it happened 20 years ago. Meaning, and now we're finding out that maybe the Kohen wasn't a Kohen. So it's machlokas if this person who ended up being a chalal, if the korbanos he brought ended up being good korbanos or not. But we wouldn't. But it seems from this Gemara, it seems if there would be some type of doubt, they would remove him temporarily pending the investigation, not to bring any proof from their demotion that he's not a Kohen. Rashi says it's my loss with Lekuhuna. They made extra safeguards and stuff for Kohen, so they out of an abundance of caution, they temporarily said, you're off the rotation as a Kohen right now. But Amar Yadana Beit the Kohen. And then one person came and said, I know that he's a kosher Kohen. His mother was not divorced. He's definitely a Kohen. Vasike, and then the Beis Din reinstated him as a Kohen. So we turn the page to Chavav Amir Beis. Va'asu Beitrei, and then two witnesses came. Va'amri ben Grush ben Chalutzahu, and then they said that his mother was either divorced or had chalitza before she married his father, the Kohen. V'achtinhe, and they demoted him another time. Va'asa Eidach, and then another individual witness came and said, V'amri Yadana Beit the Kohen, I know that he is a real Kohen. And now what does that mean? Now it means that we have two witnesses saying that he's really a Kohen. We have two individual witnesses saying he's a Kohen. You combine them, you have one group of witnesses. So everyone agrees that even though these witnesses came at different times, we can combine their testimonies and now have two witnesses testifying that he's really a kosher Kohen. And the machlokas is, are we worried that the Beis Din is going to look bad? I guess for whatever reason, there was if the Beis Din keeps issuing conflicting rulings about the same case, it kind of looks the Beis Din look bad. So the machlokas tanaim between Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer is, are we worried that in order to make the Beis Din look better, we're going to be strict in this case and not let him be a Kohen? Tanakama Savar Kevan Dachtine Lamaskinale. Since they demoted him a second time, they can't put him back to a Kohen. And Lazilula Beidina, because we're worried that it's going to make the court look bad. It's a strange case, right?
Prevent the court to be like, it's really strange.
It is strange. The part that bothers me more is that, according to this, the reason isn't because of its Eid Echad. The whole machlokus is about the Beis Din. It looks unprofessional of the Beis Din if they keep flip flopping on their things. But we're saying that the whole thing seems to be an Eid Echad. So he's explaining that it's two Eid Echads come at different times, meaning there was a first wave of suspicion. One Eid Echad is enough to clear it up, but then there's two witnesses come. So there's even more suspicion now that maybe he's not a Kohen, and then another Eid Echad comes. So now it's two witnesses against two witnesses, and the Beis Din keeps saying, we demote him, we reinstate him, we demote him again. So it would make the Beis Din look bad. And that's what the Gemara here is saying. The machlokas is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, since the Beis Din keeps flip-flopping, it doesn't look good for the Beis Din. So once the second time, two witnesses came and said his mother was divorced before she married his father, and he was demoted a second time pending the investigation, he can't be reinstated anymore. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says Beis Din has the power to demote him pending the investigation, and they have a right to reinstate him after the investigation. We're not worried that it makes the Beis Din look bad to flip flop the case. It makes them look. It certainly. I'm not saying it makes them look better, but there was an issue. They researched the issue, and based on the evidence that was presented to them, they can make a decision. When the evidence changes, they have to change their decision. It's nothing wrong with them. It has to do with the evidence that's before the Beis Din. Ein l'dayin alamasha ein avros. Dayan can only paskin based on the evidence. That's the information that he has. Maskil Rashi has a question against this. Ihachi afilu treyu treinami. According to this, even if after this, so there was the initial rumor, and then one witness came, and then we said two witnesses came that said that his mother was divorced, and we said one witness came and said that he's a grusha. How come the second case is only one witness? Let we even say two witnesses came, and still Rabbi Eliezer will say that we don't trust that. Excuse me, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel will say, Rabbi Eliezer will say we don't trust it because the problem isn't the Eidos. The problem is Zilzal Beis Dina. Here we have definitely two witnesses who come together as a group. According to what the Mishnah says, though, it seems the reason is one. But if there's two witnesses, there would still be Zilzal Beis Dina. It would still make the Beis Din look bad. From the Mishnah, it only makes it sound like if there were two witnesses, it would be okay. But if the problem is the Beis Din looks bad, even if it was two witnesses coming and saying he's a Kohen, it would still make the Beis Din look bad because they're still flip-flopping on demoting him and reinstating him. So El Amar Ravashi b'mitzterfin le'edus kamiflagi. So Ravashi has to say, no, they actually have a machlokas. If two people come, one person came on May 1st and said, I know that his mother was definitely not divorced. And then a few witnesses came a few days later and said, we think his mother's divorced. And then on May 8th, another single witness comes and says, I know his mother's not divorced. So in that case, Rabbi Eliezer holds that we don't combine witness number one, Yosef, who came on May 1st, and Binyamin, who came on May 8th. So because of that, we only have one witness testifying about it, and so that's not enough to elevate him to kahuna. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds Yosef, who came on May 1st, and Binyamin, who came on May 8th, they combined to form one group, So it's no problem. We could reinstate this man as a Kohen. But Rabbi Eliezer will hold if Yosef and Binyamin came together on May 8th, so we have two witnesses who came as one group, we can rely on them. And in that case, Rabbi Eliezer would agree with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Ubeplukta dahani tnai, and it ends up that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel are arguing about a case that we already had another machlokas tanaim about. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Ein edusun mitzdarefes ad shir shneim ke'echad. If two people saw something, but they weren't together. So, for example, if one person was on Kastner and Golf looking east, and someone was on, well, maybe this isn't the greatest example because from Gemara and Makos, if they could see each other, they could be a group. But someone saw from that corner looking east, someone saw from that corner looking west, and they didn't see each other, but they saw the same event happen. So are they considered one group of Edom or not? So the Brisa says their testimony is not combined until they saw it together. Actually, no, Rashi doesn't say that. Because this might be a little different, because in the case of a loan, let's say one person says, I saw that Shimon borrowed $100 from Ruvain on April 1st. And then someone else comes and says, I saw he borrowed, the same guy borrowed $100 from him on May 15th. So even though they don't have, but they can't be talking about the same loan because they clearly give different dates. But it's clear that Shimon did borrow money from Ruvain. So we would only say you have to pay $100 back. We don't know that there were two loans of $100. We just know of one aid for $100 on one date and a one aid for $100 on a different date. So we have testimony that he owes $100. We don't have good testimony that he owes $200. But in other cases, it might not be the same. So if you see someone kill someone else, so that's a Mishnah in Makos. So there's two cases. One is that wouldn't work. So let's say let's say they say someone was planting his field on Shabbos. So there's one window and it's a small window. So Ephraim looks out the window and then he leaves the window and then Shimon looks out the window. And both of them saw the guy planting, but they saw him planting different seeds because they didn't see it at the same time. So that's bara zach or zeh. They didn't see the same action. Well, in regard, so they didn't see the same planting. I don't actually, the example the Gemara actually gives would be, let's say they see that there's some possible adultery going on. So it's the same act that goes for several minutes. So I don't know if planting the seeds on Shabbos would be different than that or not. That even though you don't see him planting the same seeds, but if he's in one prolonged act, so maybe my example wasn't good. But if two people are seeing from different windows, either like I said, on opposite ends of the block looking towards each other, or across the street, again seeing something in the middle. So according to Mishnah Makos, if they could see each other, they're considered one group. If they don't see each other, they're not considered one group. So Rabbi Shua ben Korcha Omer, in this it says Rabbi Shua ben Korcha Afilu b'zeh or zeh. They're allowed to testify even if they saw one at the other. So that's not relevant to our Gemara over here. But then the second case that they're arguing, we have their testimony will not be accepted in Beis Din until they testify together. Rabbi Nassan says, "Shomin dvar b'shal zehayom u'chashiyavo chaver lamachar shomin dvarav." But if one's testified today and someone comes tomorrow, we listen to him. So in that case, this is the case where we're saying that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer are arguing about this. Their machlokus is the same as this machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Nasa. That one person testified today, another person came tomorrow. We combine their testimony. Now, what's a possible nafkamina between this halacha in the case if in case they would become Edom Zomimim? There is an opinion. It's a strange opinion. But the Nemuka Yosef brings, was it the Reben Gaius, I think, who is saying that Rabbi Akiva says that the third witness, it's a certain mission, doesn't come to be lenient, but rather to be strict. So if let's say you had multiple witnesses who testified about the same act, and some of them became Edom Zomimim. So even the ones that there was no testimony that they were Edom Zomimim, they also have a status of Edom Zomimim. But how could that be? There's no testimony that they're Edomim, because he holds that it goes on the whole group. Once part of the group became Edomim, the whole group becomes Edomim. And Rav Yashabir said that Reb Chaim has brought it as a proof to the fact that this is not our topic, but most averas you get punished for doing an avera. He said Reb Chaim said that an Edomim gets punished not for the avera of Edomim, but for being an Edomim. And for example, if they testified on Monday and they didn't become Edom Zomim until Wednesday, what if they would have done something else on Tuesday? If it's based on us knowing that they were criminals and they gave and they had testified falsely about someone, we didn't know that until Wednesday. So they would maintain their chazak of being a kosher witness until Wednesday, until they were proven to have been false witnesses. But if it has to do with them doing the avera, they did the avera already on Monday. So if they would have done something on Tuesday, they would have been witnesses on Tuesday. Well, they became already disqualified on Monday from doing the avera of giving the false testimony. And so Reb Chaim explained that opinion by the Ritz Gaius, I think it is that even though this person, we have no evidence, he's not getting punished for us knowing that he's an Edomi, but since he's part of a group and the group was known to have given false testimony on this day, so he also gets lumped into that because he's not being punished for the avera. We have no edus that he testified falsely, but because of the special halacha of the who's liable in Edom Zomim, he ends up getting punished even though we didn't have testimony against him. But he was in a group that the group wasn't, that the group's credibility was destroyed, so he also has the status of an Edom.
Somebody did crime, they punish him for not paying taxes.
Right. And the government can't or even Al Capone, they couldn't prove that he was manufacturing and selling the alcohol, but they said he didn't sell taxes, right? In Mishnah, the middle of Chavav Amid Beis, if a woman was captured in the hands of idol worshippers, if it was for monetary reasons, so monetary reasons is like debtor's prison. Her husband owed money and he didn't pay, so they put her in jail to induce the husband to pay. So in that case, she's allowed to remain with her husband. This is talking about not her husband's not a Kohen, because in this case, they were only using her as leverage. They wanted to keep her in one piece, so we're not worried that she would have had voluntary relations with them, which would make her of. So it's not considered she would have committed adultery while she was in their captive. But if they put her in jail because the husband was was going to be put to death, then asur l'bayla. If the husband wasn't killed yet, and they release her, she's not allowed to be with her husband because we're worried that because of his very precarious life situation that he was going to be killed, there was no incentive to keep her in one piece or whatever. And so it's possible that maybe she did have committed adultery with them voluntarily from her hand. Gemara, Amar of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Amar Rav. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak is in the name of Rav. Lo shana ela she'ad Yisrael tekifa lov de kachavet. When we said that if they captured her for monetary purposes, it was like debtor's prison. That's only when the hand of Yisrael is stronger than the goyim. Avol yad of de kachavet tekifa al atzman. But when, this is euphemistically, when the hand of the non-Jews is stronger on themselves, but it means that the Jews are subservient to them. Afilu ayidei mamon asur l'bayla. Even if they only put her in debtor's prison, they wouldn't respect the rights of the Jews anyway. So we're worried that maybe she did willingly commit adultery with them and could not remain with her husband. And just I guess we should mention Rabbeinu Tam's opinion. I think we mentioned it earlier on Daf Gimel or Daf Daled by Esther. He says that if the adulterer is a non-Jewish man, there's a heter, and she's allowed to remain with her husband. So this Gemara, I don't know how Rabbeinu Tam would have to explain this Gemara somehow that it wouldn't contradict his opinion. Masav Rava asked upon this explanation, and Shmuel bar Yitzchak Rav said, "Hey, Rabbi Yossi, Akoin Rav Zachariah ben Akatzav Labas Yisrael, Shehurhana ba'Ashkelon, Richakua b'nei Mishpachta." So Rabbi Yosef HaKohen Rabbi Zachariah Akatzav gave testimony about a Jewish girl who was, it says, pledged. So meaning this isn't legal anymore, but they borrowed money and they say, well, what's your collateral? They said, you can have my daughter if I don't pay the loan. And they couldn't pay the loan. So in Ashkelon, she had to be given over. And because of that, her own family didn't think that she could marry. So the article said in the notes they were Kohanim, and they were worried that for her case of a Kohen, she couldn't marry another Kohen anymore, so they wouldn't let her marry other Kohanim. So that's the Richakua that they distanced themselves. However, but she had testimony, she had witnesses that said that she was not secluded with the captor, so there was no way that she, and so there was no way that she was even raped by them. And the Chachamim said to them, if you believe that she was the collateral in the loan and taken, you should believe the witnesses that she was never secluded with the non-Jews, and she remains kosher to marry a Kohen. And if you don't believe that she wasn't, there's a double negative here. If you don't believe that she wasn't secluded with the non-Jews, don't believe that she was given over as the collateral. So meaning we have this, I guess, eidos from Rabbi Yossi Cohen and Rabbi Zachariah ben Akatzav, and because of that, the Chachamim said she's not just muteris to, in this case, she wasn't married yet to her husband, but she would even be allowed to marry a Kohen. So what's Rava's question? But Ashkelon is considered outside of Eretz Yisrael. So in Gittin, Ashkelon is the southern end of Eretz Yisrael, and Ashkelon is like Chutz La'aretz, and we said in regard to Gittin. That's what the first mission of Gittin says. And Rashi says the second reason. Rashi says that, and he also says this is after the Gullus. So even if Jews lived around Ashkelon by that time, there weren't too many Jews at Ashkelon. Who controlled Ashkelon? The non-Jews. So this is a case where the non-Jews control it. So according to Rabbi what Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak said in the name of Rav is that we can believe her if the Jews are in control. Well, in this case, is a case where the Jews are not in control. So why did the Chachamim believe the witnesses and say that she was not defiled by the non-Jews? And this was a case of monetary. She was given over for failure of a monetary payment. So this does not follow the statement of Rav. Viktani, and it says, we turn to Chav Zayin with Aleph, Horna in Nechbashalo. So the Mishnah says that she was, because she was the collateral, she needs witnesses. So that implies that if she had only been taken, not that her family had offered her as a collateral, but if they would have taken her to debtor's prison because her family didn't pay the loan, then we would have believed her even without witnesses. So that's against Rav's statement, who says that when the debtors would take a woman to debtor's prison, which is only for monetary matters, she's only kosher if the Jews are control that area. The Gemara says no. Who adina filo nichbasha. So that's true. That particular story was in a case where was the collateral. But even if she would have been taken by the debtors, to the debtor's prison, she would also need witnesses. We would need witnesses who saw her and saw that she was never secluded with the non-Jews. But the reason they mentioned the story, because that's what the situation was. So Rava tried to make a diuk that from that particular situation, that was a little bit different than Nechbasha. So the Gemara says, no, it's the same halacha for Nechbasha, but that happened to be that story. Sometimes the situation that came up wasn't the extreme case of the most extreme, and I don't mean any extreme, I don't mean extremist, but you have cases that are in the middle. You have cases that are, that are the most extreme case that would be allowed, or the most extreme case that would be not allowed. Nechbasha is the most extreme case. This case of where family pleasure isn't as extreme, but that was the halacha. But the halacha would be the same thing in the case of Nechbasha when they took her to get debtor's prison. Ikeda Amri, some said that the Rava's statement was a little bit different. Amar Rava says, Afanan Nami Tanina. We learned in a Brisa or a Mishnah exactly like Rav explained. Hey, Rabbi Yossi Akoin Rabbi Zahar ben Akatzav Abasi Shal Shahurna Ba'Ashkelon. Rabbi Yossi Akoin and Rabbi Zahar ben Akatzav testified about a certain Jewish woman who had been pledged as collateral for a loan in Ashkelon, and they couldn't pay the loan, so she was taken by the lenders. And her family distanced her because they thought that she wasn't kosher anymore. And she had witnesses who testified that she was not secluded with the non-Jews and she was not defiled by them. If you believe her that she was pledged, you have to believe the witnesses that she was not secluded and not defiled. And if you don't believe that she was not, again, the double negative, if you don't believe that she was not secluded and not defiled, don't believe that she was pledged in the first place. And this is a case where it was in Ashkelon, and it was a case of monetary situation. The time of the Edom Eden also. The reason that she's kosher and that she's allowed to marry a Kohen still. And our Mishnah was a little bit more general if it was a married woman to a Yisrael, but the same thing would be here for a woman to be able to marry a Kohen. The time of the Edom Eden also. The reason is that she was allowed to be to marry a Kohen was because she had witnesses who testified that she was not secluded and violated, defiled by the non-Jews. Which implies if there would be no witnesses testifying for her, we wouldn't say that she's allowed to marry a Kohen. My love, So why don't we say that it doesn't matter if she was the collateral in the loan, and it doesn't matter if they took her to debtor's prison. So there should be no difference. So in the, so in the, and then in the Ikeda Amri we said lo her and Ashani. We said no, the case where she was the collateral is different. That if she was held as collateral, now she's theirs. The family willingly gave her up, so now they could do whatever they want with her. But if the family, she wasn't collateral, and in order to try to get the father or whoever to pay back, they took her. She's worth more if they take good care of her and they don't defile her. So in this second lashon, and many rishonim usually pass a second lashon, there would be a distinction between her being taken because she was given as collateral, which is again, it's very hard for us to think of a case where someone would give their kid as collateral for a loan, versus when they took her to debtor's prison to try to get the father to pay back the loan. Ika de Rami la Mirma. Some asked it as a steer, as a contradiction. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, if it was for monetary reasons, she's allowed to. So this is a case where if she was already married, and then they took her to try to get her father, or her husband, or maybe her father, to pay back a loan, she stays permitted to her husband, because they're only trying to use her as a bargaining chip. They don't need any harm. They don't want to, because if they would do something that she wouldn't be allowed to be married to her husband, so that they're not really inducing the husband to pay back necessarily. I mean, there's different psychologies, different ways. Or minhu, but I'll ask you a contradiction. Hey, Rabbi Yossi. So we have this mission that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Zachariah ben Akatzov testified about this woman who had been the collateral on a loan, etc. Ashkelon, this case in Ashkelon was because it was for monetary reasons. So the only reason that she's allowed to marry a Kohen is because there were witnesses that she was never defiled by the non-Jews. But if there wouldn't been witnesses, we wouldn't allow her to marry Kohen. We would assume that they did defile her. So how come this mission is against that mission? No, Mishani, and they resolved the seeming contradiction by saying Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak lo kasha. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak said, and in this case it doesn't say in the name of Rav. The first line of our Gemara said Amar Rav Yitzchak Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Amar Rav. It was the name of Rav. Here it's not in the name of Rav. I don't know if that's an important detail or not. Lo kasha. It's not a contradiction. Kan she'ad ishot kifa de ovdei kochavim. Kan she'eni ovdei kochavim to kifa alatzma. There's a difference. When the Yisraelim, when the Jews are stronger in political control over there, then she's allowed to be married to her. And when it says she's not allowed to be married, that's when the Jews didn't have control over the non-Jews. So in that case, we can't be sure that she wasn't violated. So she's not allowed to stay with her husband. The two dots, a few more lines, we'll get to the Mishnah. If they took her captive because her husband was going to be put to death for something, then there's no incentive for her to not be violated. So she wouldn't be allowed to stay with her husband if somehow she got released and her husband wasn't put to death yet. Amar Rav says, these are the wives of people who steal. So the law was in that country that people who steal get put to death. So since her husband was going to be put to death, meaning Aidena Fashos was her husband stole, and so he was going to be put to death. So since he was going to be put to death, they didn't have to take any care of the wife. So even if they didn't capture the husband and he wasn't put to death, and somehow she would be released or escape, she would not be allowed to be with her husband anymore. Levi says Ishto Shal Ben Dunai, like the wife of Ben Dunai, who was a murderer. So murderers, they didn't So for someone like that who was a murderer, they really didn't have any mercy for him, so they would mistreat the wife. So she had no incentive to not to I don't know how to say this diplomatically. But if it was just someone who was a thief, even though there was a death penalty, they weren't going to mistreat her so as bad as they would mistreat the wife of a murderer. Amar Chizkiah said, "V'hu shenigmar dino la'ariga," but this is a case where, in both cases, where the husbands were already convicted and put to death. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Afi shlo nigmar dino la'ariga," even if they didn't have a conviction about death yet, but since people were pretty sure that they were going to be arrested and convicted for and put to death, so even though it hasn't happened yet, if she would escape and go with her husband, she's already forbidden to her husband because we're worried that she may have willingly given herself to the captors. So she is considered committed adultery, and now it's not allowed. She would not be allowed to be with her husband anymore. Okay, so we got to the Mishnah Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. We'll leave it here. God willing, next week we'll continue.